In June 1983, a 911 call is placed to Anchorage police around 3 o'clock in the morning. The man calling stated that there was a white female running down Fifth Avenue. She was nude and handcuffed with a story so horrific that nobody believed her. Little did police know at the time this young woman had just escaped the hands of a violent serial killer, and she was just the tip of the iceberg. Well, hello oddballs, it's your host Bobby.
And your co-host Lexi.
And this is Oddities on Elm Street. Welcome back to the show, and thank you for joining us for episode 57.
Oh my gosh.
And today's topic is actually going to be a two-parter. I feel like this is it's a topic that's known, but it's not well covered. So.
Yes, totally.
But yeah, we will jump into it, and then we'll follow it up with part 2 next week's episode. It's going to be a lot to get through, but
bear with us.
Yes. We will start, though, by introducing you to a woman named Cindy Paulson. That's where our story begins. Cindy was just 17 years old when she had moved to Anchorage, Alaska. Because she was so young, she tried to find a way of life in sex work, and like many women in this industry, she came from a dysfunctional home life. As a child, she lived in poverty and with constant abuse, and ran away from home at the age of 12. On the streets, she met her first pimp. He took her in, bought her nice clothes, and gave her fine jewelry. By the time she was 15 years old, she was the most booked worker, which is really sickening. 15 years old. It's really disturbing to think about. But Cindy has always been a survivor. At the age of 15, she was able to sneak a call to a state trooper and asked him to come and pick her up. This trooper took her to a safe house run by a church group, where she was finally able to get off the streets. But this sanctuary wouldn't last long. Cindy went back on the streets in no time, still trying to find a way to support herself. June 12, 1983 was just another day. A man calling himself John picked her up off 4th and Denali, offering her $200 for oral sex. Cindy agreed and got in, and as soon as she did, he pulled a gun on her and put her in handcuffs. This man took Cindy to his house, into the basement, where he had his quote-unquote man cave. The walls were littered with taxidermied animal heads, and Cindy was tied to a support beam with chains that were wrapped around her neck 4 times. She was taken from there and laid on a bearskin rug where she was brutally raped for hours. This man, John, told her that because she was so good to him, he was going to take her out to his cabin in the woods to spend the weekend together, and then he would take her back from where he picked her up.
Totally believable.
Yeah. They got to the airport, and he told her he just had to put a seat in his airplane so that he could make sure that she could be secured in it. And while he was setting the seat up, Cindy took off running. She was barefoot, naked, and handcuffed. John began chasing after her with a gun, and that's when Cindy was met by a man in a truck who called 911. So police arrived to find Cindy alone in her motel room. They took her out of the handcuffs, let her get dressed, and took her to the station where she was able to tell them her account of what had happened. She was also taken to get an exam done for the sexual assault by Officer Greg Baker. On the way to the exam, Cindy was able to point out the plane that she escaped from. She also said that she left her blue sneakers on the passenger side floor of the car's back seat as evidence that she had been abducted.
Smart.
Officer Baker spoke with the airport called Merrill Field to get the name of the plane's owner, his real name, and his name was Robert Hansen. Police went to Hansen's house. He was super cooperative and polite and even agreed to go to the station for an interview. While here, he denied all of the allegations against him. He also allowed police to come and search his house. Hansen was a family man, but he had sent his wife and 2 children to Europe for the summer. He also had an alibi that his friend coordinated. But when Officer Baker arrived at Hansen's house, everything was just as Cindy said that it would be. The car was the same make and model, and
the basement, I mean, how do you know that? How do you know that it's filled with taxidermy?
So, yeah, like a very unique type of thing. And she was also like able to point out random pieces of trash that they would find thrown throughout his car.
This girl is next level.
Yeah. So because of that, especially the basement, because of her description of the basement and how accurate it was, Officer Baker believed Cindy wholeheartedly. But Baker wasn't the assigned investigator.
Mm-hmm.
The investigator that was assigned to the case believed Hansen and thought that this story Cindy had told was probably fabricated. He thought that what was more likely was that Cindy had probably upped the price of her services. Hansen refused to pay, and so she was telling the story out of retaliation.
Stupid.
So the case was dropped, and this pissed Officer Baker off because, unlike the lead investigator, he really believed Cindy. So he took it upon himself to dig up any and all information he could on this Robert Hansen.
Mm-hmm.
Robert Christian Hansen was born February 15th, 1939, to parents Edna and Christian Hansen. He was born in Estherville, Iowa, but grew up in Richmond, California starting in 1942, before his family moved back to Iowa in 1949, this time settling in Pocahontas. Robert was the oldest of 2 children. His father was a Danish immigrant that had a local bakery where Robert himself was employed, and this is something he would continue in his adulthood. As a child, he was described as a painfully shy young man suffering from a stutter, severe acne, and a bad relationship with his domineering father.
Mm.
Oh, so another interesting fact that I found out is that his parents tried to force him to become right-handed, even though his dominant hand was his left.
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm.
And that seems really strange, like, in today's society, but this was actually a problem for, like, a lot of people in the past.
Yeah, they thought it was, like, of the devil.
Yeah, it's
to
mainly a religious thing, but people who were left-handed were, like, seen in a bad light. They were, like, associated with witchcraft or Satanism.
Which is
or
so wild.
It's
How do you get there? How do you get from A to B?
No idea. But so anyways, Robert was seen as a quote-unquote loser amongst his peers in school.
Which he was.
But it's strange, though, because he did participate in a lot of things. He did choir, he did the pep club, he was on the basketball team, he did track and field. But what he really loved to do were solitary hobbies like hunting, fishing, and archery.
Mm-hmm.
At age 18, he graduates high school, and it's kind of sad, but his name is even misspelled in the yearbook.
Oof. How do you misspell that, by the way?
I feel like it's pretty straightforward, but the only thing I can think is they, like, maybe misplaced the E in Hansen for an O, maybe? I don't know. So anyways, from high school, he joins the Army Reserves and does basic training at Fort Dix, New Jersey. After basic training, he returns to Iowa and continues to work in the bakery while also serving in the Army Reserves and being a drill instructor for the junior police, which was really surprising to me because I feel like you can't be shy and do that job.
Right, exactly. Like, how are you going to bark orders at someone?
I couldn't do it, and I'm not a shy person, but I would just feel embarrassed.
I could probably do it, but...
Really? Okay. You can bark orders with me anytime. Okay,
no,
so...
but to be, like, really quiet and to have a stutter, too?
Yeah.
I don't know. It just doesn't...
I know.
Doesn't make sense.
Yeah, it doesn't make sense at all. By the age of 21, Robert is already married and has a record. So in 1960, he was arrested for burning down the Pocahontas County bus garage, and that was done out of revenge for his lack of popularity in high school. Mind you, this is a few years after he's already graduated from high school, so clearly this was something that had really been brewing inside of him for quite some time.
To commit arson?
Yeah,
because you weren't popular?
Who is that affecting? Definitely not the people who bullied you in high school.
Right.
They've moved on with their lives. It's very strange.
It is.
So he was sentenced to 3 years for the arson, but he only served 20 months. His first wife divorced him while he was locked up. It's also here where he is diagnosed with manic depression, which we now call bipolar disorder.
Mm-hmm.
And he also is known to have periodic schizophrenic episodes.
Mm.
The psychiatrist that made this diagnosis also left a note that Robert had a, quote, infantile personality, meaning that he acts like a child, and that he was obsessed with getting back at people he felt had wronged him.
Great qualities.
Clearly, yeah. After being released, Robert was arrested several more times for petty theft crimes before he moved to Alaska in 1967. By this point, he had already been remarried for a few years to a woman named Darla. She was a special education teacher, and together they made the move to Alaska, where they settled down and had 2 children together. Robert was experiencing a life he hadn't known before. He was well liked by his neighbors in Anchorage. He was also well known around town after setting several local hunting records. Things seemed to be looking up for him. He had a family. He was able to spend his time doing what he enjoyed, and he was well liked among the locals because of it. But none of this stopped Robert from pursuing a life of crime. In December 1971, at age 32, Robert is arrested for the attempted abduction and rape of an Anchorage housewife. While out on bail awaiting his hearing, he kidnapped a sex worker at gunpoint, took her 160 miles away from the Kenai Peninsula, and sexually assaulted her.
While out on bail for attempting to abduct and rape another woman.
And this is very infuriating. This woman, her identity isn't known, but she was able to convince him to take her back to Anchorage. And when he did, she went to police and identified him. At his hearing, Robert was given a plea bargain. If he pled guilty to the first assault against the housewife, the charges in the rape of the sex worker would be dropped. And he took the deal. And because of this, he was sentenced to 5 years, but only served 6 months before being placed in a halfway house on a work release program.
6 months.
This is
That's bullshit.
Like, this, for me personally at least, I think this is why there needs to be higher sentencing requirements in sexual assault cases, because these guys get out and they still have the desire to go and hunt for victims, but this time they think they have to commit murder in order to prevent themselves from being caught again. Right. And this is exactly what Hansen, along with so many other serial killers, would go to do.
Right.
It's also like what made him realize he had to start choosing his victims wisely.
Right, because the court took the side of the housewife and just kind of like pushed the other lady off, which is very typical back then and today. You know, it's a quote unquote upstanding woman and a sex worker to them, and they just don't care about the sex worker. And that back then, when he was 32, that is what made him realize that if he chose his victims carefully, he would be able to go under the radar.
At least get away with it
for a while.
A lot longer.
Right.
Yeah. It's very...
He's an upstanding citizen. He is a family man who owns a business.
Yeah.
And they're a whore.
Yeah.
Which I don't think they are. I'm just saying what...
In society, though, it's like there are so many people... The argument has been made over and over again. Well, you can't rape a sex worker.
You can.
Yes, you can. They're still human. That has consent, and that can be withdrawn at any time. Right. There shouldn't be an argument over that, but he definitely noticed this pattern and, used it to his advantage.
Right. And it's a lot less likely for a sex worker to, speak out about it.
Right.
Just because of their lifestyle, they're much less likely to
be believed
and speak to the police about, hey, I've been doing this illegal activity, but this happened.
Right.
It just doesn't happen as near as much as it should.
Right. And things just continue to escalate from here. But Hansen, you'll see this theme where he is always given the benefit of the doubt. So he would be arrested yet again at the age of 37 for larceny after he stole a chainsaw from a local supply store.
How do you...
At this point, I'm just like...
A chainsaw? What did you do? Like...
I don't... What do you need that for? I don't get it.
Put it under your coat?
Yeah.
You got some big bread you need to cut?
Like this guy. Oh my God.
Right.
So, again, despite his criminal record, he was released on time served, and thankfully, at the very least, he was required to seek psychiatric help for his bipolar diagnosis.
Step in the right direction.
Yeah, so that's good, at least. But over the years, the bodies of missing women started to turn up. Now, we'll get more into who these women were and what happened to them in part 2. With the discovery of 3 different women, Detective Glenn Floethy had a strong belief that they were all killed by the same perpetrator. So, Detective Floethy contacted FBI Special Agent John Douglas, requesting his help creating an offender profile based off from the information collected in these 3 murder cases. And just for those who don't know, John Douglas is kind of like who Mindhunters, the series on Netflix, is based off from.
Right.
If you haven't seen that, it's amazing. I think John Douglas worked with Ed Kemper.
He worked with so many.
Charles Manson, like so many really like high profile cases. And
he became incredibly accurate at profiling.
And I'll tell you what he says about who he thinks is murdering these women in Alaska.
Right.
It's so spot on that it's scary.
It's freaky.
It really
is. How do you know that?
I don't know, but he is just like the psychology behind it. It's so interesting to me. And again, if that's something that you are interested in, like, go watch Mindhunter. You won't be disappointed because it's just so cool how they figure these things out. But it's like around this time that serial killers are becoming a problem in America, right? And I could be wrong while I'm saying this, but I think that John Douglas pretty much was responsible for putting together a special task force that was responsible for profiling serial killers.
Right. And because he had, okay, so I just looked it up. He worked with David Berkowitz, Ted Bundy, John Wayne Gacy, Charles Manson, Edmund Kemper.
BTK was another one, wasn't it?
Isn't that David Berkowitz?
No, David Berkowitz is son of Sam.
Oh, yeah. He worked with so many prolific killers.
Yeah. It's just interesting how, like, during his interviews with them, he's gathered all of this information and been able to just draw from it in every different scenario.
Right.
And from that, compile characteristics of what this...
flip it.
Yeah.
Right.
It's just so interesting. So this is what FBI Special Agent John Douglas had to say. Douglas thought that the killer would be an experienced hunter with low self-esteem, that he would have a history of being rejected by women, and that he would most likely keep souvenirs of his murders. He also suggested that the murderer might stutter. So using this profile, Floethy investigated possible suspects until he reached one that fit just right, and who just so happened to also own a plane. Perfect. Robert Hansen.
Uncanny. To know that, like, the stutter thing is what really, really gets me. Like, how would you know?
I don't know.
He has a stutter.
I know, it's so wild.
It is. All hail John Douglas. Yeah,
he's a genius. So let's go back to the beginning of our story. Cindy Paulson has just escaped a man that we now know as Robert Hansen. And from there, Hansen agrees to go to police for questioning. He also allows them to search his home. And even though Cindy's testimony of what had happened that night was horrific, the lead investigator on the case doesn't believe her, but Officer Greg Baker does. And he starts to look into this Robert Hansen guy.
Because he's, like you said again, he's pissed.
Yeah.
Because he's like, I know that this guy is up to no good, and you guys don't want to deal with it.
You're just going to let him get away with it.
I'm going to fucking do it.
Yep. And while he's doing that, a woman named Maxine Farrell...
Love her too. We love Maxine.
Yes. She worked in homicide at the Anchorage Police Department. She begins to notice a pattern. She had created a chart including 10 missing women out of Anchorage, and she brought these concerns to her superiors. In an interview, Maxine would say, quote, "They laughed at me and told me, no, you're wrong. They thought I was stupid. Stupid woman thinking there's a serial killer. I wasn't stupid." Ooh, I just got
me
chills.
Too.
She's such a badass.
She's such a badass.
And she was right. She was definitely onto something, but With nobody to back her up, she had to take things into her own hands.
Mm-hmm.
Maxine began speaking with the friends and families of these missing women to try and gather more information. She asked them about any jewelry they were known to wear because, as a psychology major, she knew that serial killers were known to keep souvenirs.
Mm-hmm.
Now, state troopers would eventually begin to look into these missing women because of Maxine's findings. And meanwhile, Officer Greg Baker has now collected a fat stack of information on Robert Hansen, and he sends all of this information over to state troopers.
Mm-hmm.
In October 1983, state troopers bring Robert Hansen in for questioning. While he's being questioned by detectives, the troopers are searching his house, and what do you know? They find a plastic bag full of jewelry.
And they are like searching hardcore.
Yeah.
They found all of this up
In the attic. Mm-hmm.
The attic.
Yeah.
And it was like underneath insulation because they had searched like the whole house and basically all that was left was the attic. And they went up, they were poking around, and finally one of the officers peeled back some insulation. He found this little baggie, and Maxine was there.
Yeah.
They gave the baggie to her, and she was like, yep, this, and that. That's it. He's our guy.
God.
And then they also found the guns correlating to the bodies.
What a crazy moment that must have
Right?
been for them. To be like, oh my God, we got this guy.
Right. We got this fucker.
Yeah. So, yeah, they do ask Maxine to join the search because of her knowledge of the jewelry belonging to these missing women, and she is able to identify pieces that she now knows belongs to the victims of Robert Hansen.
Mm-hmm.
The jewelry was found in the attic, like you said, alongside rifles that were hidden in the insulation, and these rifles matched the bullet casings that were linked to several crime scenes. Hansen was handcuffed and placed under arrest, but not for murder. He was arrested for insurance fraud.
Let that soak in for just a second. Which, like, thank God they had this.
They had that at least.
Like, take him into custody.
Good God. Yeah, so I guess he had, like, reported a bunch of things stolen.
Which
and
they found
in the attic alongside all of this evidence. So they did, however, keep him locked up without bail while they worked to make a case for murder charges. Thank God.
Mm-hmm.
Because we know what he did last time he was out on bail.
Right. He has no self-control.
No. Another thing officers found tucked away behind the headboard of Hansen's bed was an aviation map. On the map were numbered pinpoints 1, 2, 3, 20, 21, all the way up to 37 little X's marked on this map. Flothi was looking over the map, wondering if all of the marks on it were the grave sites of Hansen's victims. He went to another trooper and asked him to identify where they had found the remains of a 24-year-old woman the year prior. The trooper responded saying, "Well, it's right here. You have it marked on the map." And that is where we will have to leave off, and we'll pick up here in next week's episode. So make sure to stay tuned. Follow our podcast on Spotify or wherever you listen if you haven't, so that you can stay up to date when it comes out. Thank you for joining us today. We hope you have a lovely week, and remember to always keep it spooky.